right, welcome to our final Bro Diallo book review on Del Jones' Culture Bandit series. Of course, this is Volume 3, Sex Prisoners by Del Jones. We covered, you can check the Bro Diallo YouTube for the Part 1, Culture Bandits, Culture Bandits 2, The Annihilation of African Images, and Culture Bandits Volume 3, Sex Prisoners. Of course, all three, including this one, was written by Del Jones, aka Nana Kuntu, aka the War Correspondent. It was published by Del Jones Books and Music, 2004, dedicated to Quarindin, his wife, and his wife is also the author of Maintaining Our Temples, which I think we might review that book. Maybe I'll do a series of books on holistic health and diet, veganism, eating a diet to ward off chronic disease and premature death and injury. That's a good idea. Take a note of that. He also dedicates the text to Dr. Ashaka Musa Barashango, who had recently passed around the time this book was published, Dr. Jack Felder, one of Del's mentor, and a few others. This book is the first book in the Sex Prisoners series that actually has a table of contents, which makes it easier to kind of navigate the text. But because we didn't use it in the others or go so strict on the table of contents, I won't do that here just for continuity purposes. So that is the text, the dedication, table of contents, which we won't go over directly. And so let's get to the meat of the book. Actually, I have to confess, I first read this book almost immediately when it came out. And it's ironic because when I was revisiting the text for the review, I was thinking to myself, man, this is going to be some what would be called today hotepery in terms of puritanical. I'm just, if you had asked me, the text would be puritanical in its assertion, because Del was an old school brother from the 60s and 70s in his most politically active stages in the Pan-African black nationalist struggle. But to my own surprise, it was quite a progressive reading on the concept of sex prisoners and sexuality and the manipulation of sex by global white domination and by our oppressors and the media that they control. And let me make one more note before we begin. We're going to be using the term white supremacy because that's the term that Del Jones used in 2004 in his text. So we know in 2020 hindsight that it's not really appropriate to use terms like white supremacy, white privilege, and it's more appropriate to use terms such as white pathology in the place of white privilege and white domination, white hegemony, white aggression in the place of white supremacy. But that's a whole nother discussion. But for the sake of the text and sticking with the letter of the text that we're reviewing, we're going to use his language of white supremacy. But that's a little asterisk I'd like to inject in there. And you won't believe how many times I'll use the term white supremacy in context and someone will go into my comments or DM me like, oh brother, I thought you said we were not supposed to say white supremacy. So just to try to ward that off. It probably won't ward that off, but it will. I'm going to lead with the basic premise or the message of the book. Del Jones says that sex is one of the strongest drives. It's how we reproduce ourselves, and it's something that preoccupies us physically, emotionally, psychologically. It's one of the, if you would read Dr. Ben or Reverend Dr. Ashaka Musa Barashango, who the book is dedicated to, it is the closest we can reach to the human concept of heaven or state of heaven. So our oppressors understand that if you take a fundamental drive such as food, shelter, identity, sex, and you can gain some type of control or means of manipulating that, then you will have control over masses of population and not to have to exert so much force, military or otherwise, in order to control populations. So that's the basic premise of the book. Del Jones opens the book with a quote from Malcolm X stating that if you're afraid to tell the truth, why you don't even deserve freedom. He states that because he knew that talking about or writing a text about sex would provoke a lot of backlash, whether it's, you can't please everybody. And United States is a puritanical country, and it was founded by Puritans. We like to identify how the United States was founded on slavery and genocide, and we love identifying elements of oppression, racism, genocide, discrimination in modern America that trace back to its roots. But I don't see as much African people identifying the fact that the United States was also founded on puritanical religious ideology. And I think that's because a lot of black nationalists can proudly say, I'm not a racist, I'm not a genocidal maniac, but most of our black nationalists, past and present, could not accurately or comfortably say, I'm not a Puritan. I don't hold to puritanical, patriarchal Western values, Judeo-Christian values, the concepts of family, or even the very concept of manhood, or what constitute womanhood, and things of that nature. So we hear a lot about people saying, oh yeah, America was founded on slavery and genocide. It was also founded on puritanical principles. And just like the founding ideas of racism and genocide, oppression, capitalism saturate modern America, and all of us who came up in this land, whether we came up as the oppressor or the oppressed, so do puritanical religious ideology, principles, values, outlooks. And it's so pervasive in the society, we don't even recognize it, because it's like the fish trying to recognize water. It surrounds you, so the fish is the last creature to recognize wetness in water. But anyway, I digress. In the introduction, Dale states very clearly that sex is weaponized under oppression. So something that is natural, something that is absolutely necessary for the perpetuation of our species, becomes something that is political, weaponized. Something that used to be life-giving, life-affirming, and help to connect you to other people, becomes something that is danger, literally life-threatening or dehumanizing. And we have to understand that. Dale Jones states that when we think of instruments of politics, war, and religion, we rarely think of sex as a lethal instrument of manipulation, control, and death. Yet, it is a powerful tool and is used for political purposes on both mass and individual basis. And so this is to basically, as he said, in terms of telling truth, the Malcolm X quote, that a lot of times people want to leave sex, especially people outside of that have surpassed their religious indoctrination or abandoned their religious indoctrination, say, well, hey, sex is an individual thing, sex is between a man and a woman, or sex is between two consenting adults, and we shouldn't politicize it. We shouldn't try to get into other people's bedrooms. Liberals and leftists are very fond of saying politics doesn't belong in the bedrooms, or leave politics out of the bedroom. Dale Jones asserts that it's not possible. Your self-identity is politicized, whether you're identified with the oppressor or you identify with the oppressed. And every element, as he said, every element of culture is politicized and weaponized as a tool of liberation or a tool of our ongoing oppression. And sexuality is a core element of culture. Dale Jones states, it is my purpose here to look at the politics of sex and how white supremacy has refined the art of propaganda and cultural banditry to aid them in controlling and maintaining the colonization of sex in order to fracture the culture of peoples they subjugate, without creating people of color as their sex prisoners. Their ability to brainwash, miseducate, and control would be severely hampered. I mean, that is a very bold statement about sex. So I agree with Dale Jones that we need to throw out the utopian concept that sex is a personal thing, or sex is strictly intimate, or that politics needs to stay out of the bedroom, or that love conquers all. All of these myths about sex, sexuality, and intimacy that we like to, that are idealized or utopian, are just not what is available to us. Who you have sex with, how you have sex, when you have sex, where you have sex, and your very ideas and concepts about what gets you off or what repulses you are all culturally and politically grounded. Not saying that they're fixed, not saying that they're static, but they do have an element of politics, of culture, of history, and identity. Moving on, Dale Jones also states that Sex Prisoners was not designed to advocate for specific sexual behavior or elevate your sexual practices. Its sole purpose is to help make sure you understand the enemy's mass media, the control the enemy's mass media has on your sexuality. So, a lot of times we think, hey, I do this because I want to do it. I'm into this because it's what I'm into. I'm not going to argue that, but one thing we can't do, I once wrote a poem that says, your innate desires and belief systems are impacted by your social, political, cultural status in society. So again, as we said in Culture Bandits, when in the earlier editions of the Culture Bandits text, Dale Jones stated that you can't simply just enjoy music. You just can't enjoy your favorite TV shows. You can't just enjoy your favorite songs and artists, because everything that comes into your view, that is consumed by your senses, has an element of, is either trying to move you in directions, it's either trying to motivate you to move or keep you satisfied where you are, or even regression. So everything that you interact with has to be taken with politics. So the first four quotes here, the last three quotes, they all kind of restate the same point, because I think Dale Jones wanted to get ahead of, in the introduction of the book and early part of the book, that sex is not just between you and your lover or lovers. It's not something, and because the right, the oppressors, the racist have so politicized sex, we think that the appropriate thing is try to depoliticize sex, get the government out of my ovaries, or get the government out of the bedroom. But that is not an effective response. The more effective response is saying, if they're trying to create a right-wing, racist, Eurocentric concept of sex, we can't just say depoliticize sex. We have to create revolutionary sex. Or a wonderful song you can Google, revolutionary love, revolutionary intimacy, revolutionary childbearing, revolutionary sex, and create sex that will challenge the systems and institutions of global white domination, omnicide, capitalism, imperialism. But moving on, Dale Jones in the section of Lost said that if you lack consciousness, the ultimate outcome of the loss of consciousness is extinction. So if an individual loses consciousness, literally loses consciousness, they don't have the capacity to feed themselves, they don't have the capacity to shelter themselves, to interact, to engage. And ultimately, we call people who are not physically conscious, we call them brain dead or in a vegetative state. Well, Dale Jones asserts that a collective, a race, a nation of people who lose their cultural consciousness are in the same vegetative state. And you can keep someone alive in a vegetative state for quite some time, but their muscles will begin to atrophy, their brain function will begin to be greatly reduced, their respiratory functions, up until they die. And then they need certain supports like respiratory machines, respirators, feeding tubes. They need to be turned so that they don't develop bed sores. So Dale Jones, again, believes that we're culturally, collectively in that state. We're not able to take care of ourselves, so we look to systems and cultures and institutions outside of Africa, outside of the black community, to aid us, and he believes that is greatly attributed to our collective lack or loss of consciousness, and the culture bandits deliberately work to subvert our conscious. Moving on to the pre-puberty attack element. Dale Jones says that we've lost our ability to socialize our children. And again, I have to say this is me, not Dale Jones, that we fall into the mistake that thinking because it takes two people to procreate, that's what it takes to cultivate. It takes two people to procreate, to give birth to, or to fertilize an egg, give birth to a child. But it takes a society or it takes a village. I know that's been corrupted. I don't know if y'all remember back in the 90s, early 90s, Hillary Clinton appropriated the phrase "it takes a village," and if you say it takes a village to a white right-wing racist, they won't think of an African proverb. They'll think of the Hillary and Bill Clinton, because they appropriated that concept for his re-election campaign and his educational policies. But that's a whole nother discussion. But anyway, he said we've lost that ability. Why? Because all of the systems and institutions that we need to sustain our life is under the control of our oppressors. Even black institutions where you have black people at the helm, a hospital with the black administrators and black physicians and nurses, schools with black principals and teachers, all of this, black businesses with black proprietors, they're still operating within a Western concept, and they're trying to get white Yankee dollar, they're trying to get white currency. So even if it's black on the surface, the policies, the principles, the protocols that govern how we structure our institutions are overseen by white, and if we don't adhere to their protocols, their policies, their standards, they can come and shut us down, either through simply putting chains on the door or sending in their forces, police or military forces. So we do not socialize our own children, and our children are not socialized into an African society. That was one of my issues with the expansion of African-centered education. And a lot of people say, well, we just need to teach our children to be proud of who they are. And what good is an African-centered education outside of an African society? And also Kwame Ture spoke about this too, but again, I don't want to go down any rabbit holes. I want to stay focused on the text. But you can't stop at an African-centered society. Really, an African-centered education is inadequate, because all you do is awaken I'm not going to say all you do, but you awaken the innate brilliance of African children, but then they still have to go out and earn Western currency, and many of them have to sell their brilliance, their skills, their talent to the highest bidder, which is more likely than not a multinational corporation or a government agency, which is going to force them to, again, adhere to that agenda, follow those principles, protocols. So it's a losing game. We need revolutionary education, not how to succeed in the society, but how to subvert the society, how to counter the society, how to erect the society, not integrate into an existing one. Anyway, let's go back to the text. Del Jones states that the social changes brought by the civil rights movement, which led to this fake integration, along with the development of America's overpowering mass media, locked us into their systematic brainwashing and anti-African propaganda. The American nigger factory is the main staple of subjugation, and it swings into action as soon as the African child is delivered. In the United States, the African child is attacked before their delivery. So there is no sanctuary, there is no reprieve. Every element of what we do needs to be radicalized and revolutionized. And when you think about having a child, you have to say, well, if I'm giving birth to an African child, then I have to know that this child is going to either be subjugated or a resistance fighter. There is no place on the earth for African people to retreat to. Even if you're in a space that has no overt oppression, that has no oppressors. There are a couple of movements now. I was just reading an article before I started of these 19 families that came together and bought 90 acres of land to create a safe community for people. And let's say I hope it is, and let's say it is successful. But what about the dioxin? What about the global warming? What about the contamination of the soil, nuclear fallout? There are still, even if every European stopped being racist and stopped engaging in Urugu racist aggression, if everything else stayed the same in terms of the economy, production, distribution, we would still be rapidly racing towards extinction on a massive scale. So whenever black people think about creating safe spaces for our children, whether that's a school or an entire community, we still are obligated to cultivate revolutionaries, people who can subvert systems and institutions. At the same time, they erect systems and institutions that are diametrically opposed to those that they erect. Moving on. He has a chapter called Mother Humpers. He loved that word. If you ever see a Dale Jones lecture online, and whenever you hear him say the word Mother Humpers, he's very proud of that less vulgar way of saying motherfuckers. But he states that the evolution of white aggression from slavery to today, their opposition didn't end, it evolved. So he's saying the mother humpers, that Europeans are just as racist, just as avaricious, just as brutal, just as discriminatory, just as, how many more negative terms or adjectives can I apply? But he said it has evolved. And a lot of times we find ourselves only being able to recognize overt racism. Cops shoot someone down. Trump gets on and says something overtly racist. But when there's, let's say Obama gets on and enacts a imperialist, oppressive policy, we don't recognize it because racism evolved from being a situation where there were all white slave-owning presidents to where a black man can take the helm of the government and be just as imperialist, capitalistic, and anti-African as his white predecessors, but we don't recognize that evolution. We have to wait for Trump to come back to finally realize again, oh, yeah, America's racist. Let's take to the streets. So we have to understand how our oppressor is not just cunning and deceptive, but they are willing to evolve. Racism adapts, oppression adapts, agendas for genocide and adapt. And we have to always be aware of that and never be lulled into submission. Like, let's take Walt Disney, another example. The Walt Disney Company used to make literally blackface images in their media. Big lip, big white lips, and dark black skin, bug eyes, and have black people slumping and slapping and playing banjo and eating watermelon. And we'd be like, that's racist. Walt Disney is racist. But then they can make something as grand as the Black Panther movie. And there's a lot of evolved racism, a lot of evolved pro-imperialist propaganda, a lot of evolved pro-Western values propaganda embedded within the Black Panther. So their ultimate objective hasn't changed, but their methodology has evolved and developed even beyond the point where they could be slapping us in the face and we're cheering for them, where we demand they take our money. So, moving on. And I know this, like, when we gonna get to the sex? This is all a part of building up his positions and arguments, because is it specifically sex in the media? Moving on to when Dale talks about minstrels, jesters, and gladiators. Again, the minstrels are the singers and the dramatic actors. The jesters are the comedians. The gladiators are athletes. He says our celebrities is their property. To quote Dale Jones, success is a bastard of relationships, keeping us from reaching what we were or could be. Idols of treason are pushed as wholesome role models, even though they are laced with race betrayal. This results in the glorification of filthy pimps, genocidal drug lords, lying and selling out politicians, and all kinds of public prostitutes, all packaged in Hollywood. So, again, we just lost one of the most beloved celebrities, Chadwick Boseman, of this era. And I had kind of typed this up and reviewed the book and got my notes long before I even knew he was sick, let alone he passed. But his legacy, if you look at his movie legacy, the movie 42, Jackie Robinson, a hyper-integrationist. Thurgood Marshall, he played Marshall, a hyper-integrationist. James Brown, he played James Brown in a biopic, and what was it? He went from Say It Loud, I'm black and I'm proud, to Living in America, a hyper-integrationist. Actually, James Brown was a pro-Reagan Republican. And then those are known historical figures, but then you go to T'Challa, who is also a fictional superpowered hyper-integrationist. And in the time that black folks are basically living through the fallout of the absolute failure of integrationism, We literally just a couple of days ago had a march on Washington, and someone thought that it was a good idea to juxtapose the 1968 March on Washington with the 19, or was it 63? I don't know. One of them. We've had so many marches on Washington, with the 2020 March on Washington, and didn't realize and say, hey, this is a treadmill. This is redundant. This is nothing to celebrate, that we're back in Washington marching for our fundamental human rights. Yet again, we did it during the Reconstruction era. We've been marching on Washington for over a century for the exact same issues. So in that time where integrationism has failed, one talented actor who has literally reinvigorated or brought back to life some of the hyper integrationists of our past, recent and distant past, is celebrated as a hero. It's something to think about. I think when he talks about minstrels, I'm not saying, again, I'm going to be repeating a lot of stuff because each of his books, Culture Bandits 2, Annihilation of African Images, and Culture Bandits, Sex Prisoners. And I think if Del Jones had not died, may he rest with the ancestors, I think he was planning a whole series of Culture Bandits, from Annihilation of African Images, Sex, Education, Politics, down. But again, he did not. But he was only able to complete the first 3 along with his other books, which we will get to eventually. But I think that Del Jones would have been able to give us a lot more. But this is not to take away from the man's talent. But when we look at any of our entertainers, or as Del Jones called them, Minstrels, Jesters, and Gladiators, even though they fill us with pride and we see them as role models, I'm not going to repeat the quote, but they belong to our oppressors. Even if they entertain us, they don't belong to us. Meaning simply, not in terms of owning people, but in terms of whose interests do they represent, whose values, whose agendas do they advance. The agendas of black, but some black people have nothing, their agenda is nothing more than to integrate into the system. But we who seek freedom, liberation, we who seek to preserve the planet's ecosystem, whose do they preserve? So, but more on that later. In fact, I promised some people I wouldn't even speak on Chadwick Boseman because, I got in trouble. Every time I got in trouble trying to inject some ask some pointed questions and try to do some critical analysis of Kobe and other heroes and champions and role models. But let's move on. Del Jones states, our culture is supposed to heal us, guide us, and encourage our royal rumble with the New World Order. The New World Order is synonymous with global white supremacy, imperialism, capitalism, but he used the term New World Order. Instead, it's a product in the enemy's hands, helping to destroy our genetic memory and socialize our people into perpetual victims. Our musical expressions are turned into products that lead the enemy's final genocidal attack by keeping us fragmented as terrorized punks, kicking out what Chuck D calls sex for profit. He states, sex is like sugar. They put it in everything, and especially where it doesn't belong. They process it, turn it white, and enrich it with their cultural killing agents, just to see you wiggle. They understood that as long as we are confused about what sex is, when it's cool, where it's cool, and the natural purposes, sex will remain their most powerful political tool, which is something I never thought about. I read this years ago, and now I think that sex is their most powerful political tool. And it's ironic because if you look at, again, U.S. political history, more prominent men in politics have been brought down in sex scandal than almost anything else. A politician, president, senator, congressman, mayor can engage in war crimes and atrocities, can collapse budgets, steal, commit all forms of corruption, but let a sex scandal emerge, and then people start to pay attention. So even though if you asked me before I revisited Del Jones' Sex Prisoners, what's the most powerful political tool under the New World Order, white domination, I would probably not have said sex. But I mean, even if you look at the QAnon nonsense or the Pizzagate nonsense. You know, it is an argument I could make if I was forced to make an argument that sex is probably their most powerful political tool. But moving on, he talks about cyber sex for nuts. And this was so interesting to me, this area where in the chapter of cyber sex for nuts, where Dale Jones talked about how the U.S. society went from being an extremely controlled society in terms of sex and sexual expression to being a completely open society. He said literally, United States went from uniform blanket censorship of sex to saturation of sex. You look back at the chaste era of the 50s and the salacious era of the 80s. It's day and night. All in, and people think that, like, to tie that to the sexual revolution. But there have been many, quote unquote, sexual revolutions throughout history where that didn't take hold. I mean, the women's suffrage movement was also a sex liberation movement. There is a strong sexual element if you read Before the Mayflower, and if you read, it's gonna come to me, People's History of the United States. The sexual dominance of white men in the Southern plantation system played a stronger role in motivating white men to sustain the system of slavery as the economic elements of it. So there were other fights to change the sexual politics of the United States, but why in the 50s was it so closed down? And then between the 50s and the 80s, you had more transformation in sex in society than any other era. Even now, even with the slut walks and the gay rights movement, that time between the 50s and the 80s was one of the grandest times, or what Dale Jones called loosening up to get a tighter grip. And I mean, really go back and look at this. In the 50s, the old I Love Lucy show and Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver. When you look at those TV shows, when they went into the marital bedroom, the couples always had, like Ricky and Lucille Ball, they had twin beds in the bedroom. You were legally not allowed to show a single person bed. And I'm not talking about being in the bed. You couldn't show an empty queen king size bed in a bedroom. Whenever you showed a bedroom on television between a married adult couple, it had to be two separate beds. Go back and look it up. Or I'm sure Romo will put it up on the screen so y'all don't think I'm crazy. But also, they didn't show bathrooms. One of the first major media movies or television shows that showed a bathroom was Psycho with Alfred Hitchcock. And that was considered that he showed a toilet on television screen or a movie screen. To see a toilet was scandalous. And my great-grandmother, Grandma Bowie, when she would watch television, Dynasty, the shows that she liked from the 70s and 80s, whenever there was just a minor kiss, when a leading man would give his leading woman a little peck on the cheek or the lips, she'd cover her eyes because she came up and came into adulthood in the 40s and 50s. And now, you know, my kids are able to watch things on children's oriented media. And some people, I'm not trying to get into the argument like, yeah, you know, sex is natural, free the boob, or yeah, we should, the good old days. I don't think those were the good old days, because at the same time they wouldn't show twin beds on the TV screen. They were murdering black folks in the streets. I guess they're doing it now. So those weren't the good old days. I'm not having a make America great or chaste again argument, but you have to ask yourself, what caused this leap? I have my ideas. It's deeply related to the black liberation struggle, the decolonial struggle, because between the 50s and 80s was also the time that Europeans were losing their hold on their overseas colonies in Asia, Africa, Central America. There was the non-alignment movement in Central and Latin America, the Caribbean Federation, the black liberation struggle, the Black Liberation Army, Black Panther Party. All this was going on. And that is related, if you want to go beyond, because I don't want to go too far beyond the text, but Dr. Welsing talks about whites when they start to lose their grip and how they begin their psychosexual reaction to that. like in the 70s at the same time, white men started streaking, taking off all their clothes and running into public places. It's a fascinating thing, but Del Jones said it's basically them loosening up to get a tighter grip. We can control people through strict censorship, specifically of sexuality, or we can also maintain that same control by flipping it and having saturation of sex in the society. Very interesting. But I mean, that we could spend a whole, and maybe I will do a specific, because I've been wanting to actually do a talk on pornography, and there's a really good book on pornography called The Secret Museum. But again, let's get back to the text. But it's basically loosening up to get a tighter grip, that we should pay attention to when the society, when our oppressor at one moment is saturating our media with sex, and then they're censoring all sex and trying to close it down, and family values to profit over everything to sex sells. And this is not just, the corporations or the people in control are confused or crazy. This is very deliberate weaponization of sex. But moving on, Del Jones states, confusion is the enemy of revolution. This country and its Federal Communications Commission went from rigid reactionary control of the broadcast industry because that is what was needed in the so-called Cold War era. Now it's deregulation. Oh, I put it out. Anyway, I gotta fix this because these notes. Anyway, now it's deregulation that allows them to show and tell sex on the airways. Why? Different times, different goals require different strategies and tactics of control. And you can also think about how old folks like to talk about young people and cancel culture. And young people are so offended that the people need safe spaces and snowflakes. But if you go back to the HUAC, House Un-American Activities in 1938, wearing long hair was triggering of the right wing. You were a communist if you wore sandals and exposed your toes in public. So the same people that mock the left or the liberals aren't left, but again, I digress. The same people that mock people for safe spaces wanted to create a whole country that was a safe space from radical thoughts, marijuana, and negative anti-patriotic views. So it's just things turn. Now the left is considered ultra sensitive. Holy and sacred versus non-commodifiable and non-marketable and non-exploitatable. That's basically the concept that nothing is really holy or sacred in this society, because what sacred means is something that can't be turned into a commodity, can't be marketed, and can't be exploited because it is too exalted by the public and so on and so forth. But now that's the concept, and when you think nothing is holy and nothing is sacred, it's not really about religion in an economic, cultural context. It's about economics. But moving on. Bling bling, the joke is on you. He talks about, this is a really interesting chapter where he talked about the commodification of love, courtshiping, and sex, where this is in 2004, which was kind of like when this first started, this whole concept where you don't date someone outside of your credit score, and it's okay to have strict economic requirements and standards for who you will procreate with, even though if our ancestors had followed this, and what I say, if our ancestors had followed this if you ain't got a 750 credit score, you can't get none, and things of that concept, even though they had that music, ain't nothing going on but a rent, you gotta have a J-O-B if you want to be with me, or romance without finance is a nuisance. Black folks would talk that shit all the time. But in reality, our standards for attractiveness, for what made another person an eligible or suitable mate, was not economic. It was more important that did you come for good people? What kind of people did you come from? What was your status amongst black folks? Not your status amongst Experian or Equifax. And I believe that It's harming us now that we have economic, such strong, and even I see progressive, conscious, revolutionary people talking about, yeah, you know, you got to get your money right before you can have a child, or if a man ain't got, or if a woman is on Section 8, then don't date her. Because if we acknowledge, and if you refuse to acknowledge this, you're full of shit or a liar or self-delusion, but we have to acknowledge that our economics are controlled by the oppressor. As Scheherazade Ali said, the white man is the god of jobs. The white man can turn a hood street urchin into a billionaire, or turn a billionaire into a hood street urchin overnight. So if we have economic as the core standard for us, our intimate relationships and our reproduction, when and how and why we reproduce, then we're literally putting our economic, our physical intimacy, our connection, and our capacity to reproduce ourselves, we're literally packaging that up and handing it over to Wall Street, handing it over to Experian, handing it over to Harvard or the University of Chicago. We're using conditions, status, titles that are outside of our community to determine how we will relate to each other inside our community. I think it's a fatal flaw. It is a fatal flaw. But this is a relatively new thing. Like I said, black folks have always been conscious of money and survival. But that wasn't at the core. That was more of a peripheral, or maybe that would be the third or fourth consideration. Now it has become the core. So the commodifying our sex is basically turning over. You know, because I could walk out this house tomorrow and a CEO or a government official can bestow a title or give me a check, and bro Diallo goes from being a poor brother living on the south side to a wealthy, powerful man living on the Gold Coast. And does that make me more worthy of reproduction? Or even my fundamental human value? Or should I leave my wife and find a woman that more fits my stature in society? I mean, that's some bullshit. We on some bullshit. And it's a trick. A whole new trick. Man, somebody's having a party over here in the middle of quarantine. Also, Dale Jones gave, remember the diamonds also. Let's just talk about, he talks a lot about diamond extraction and the diamond industry in terms of diamonds being a symbol of love. And he really wants black folks to stop diamonds. My wife, I've never given my wife a diamond. And it's not just because I can't afford a diamond, but because I understand it ain't worth shit. But I also, her fundamental values. You know, I got this little stainless steel wedding band to keep all the ladies at distance. And she has, I think her thing is white gold because she's just a tad bit more bougie than me. But anyway, Dale Jones took time to kind of deviate and give 10 reasons why you should never accept a diamond ring from anyone under any circumstances. And I just want to kind of run this list down as to why, because we got these rappers, and I think, what did Dale Jones call the rappers? The Minstrels, the Jesters, and the Gladiators. Totally saturated in diamonds. You know, diamonds are now associated with hip hop more so than they are with marriage proposals and engagement. But here's 10 reasons why you should never under any circumstances wear or buy or accept a diamond, and any black person who does wear a diamond should be looked at with suspicion, if not outright considered to be a race traitor. Number 1, you've been psychologically conditioned to want a diamond. And just if somebody's trying to trick you, just, you know, out of self-respect, don't fall for it. Number 2, diamonds are priced well above their value. If you've ever tried to resell a diamond, you would know that. Number 3, diamonds have no resale value. I guess I'm kind of getting out in front of Dale. Number 4, diamond miners are disproportionately exposed to HIV and AIDS. Number 5, open pit mines pose environmental threats. Number 6, diamond mine owners violate indigenous people's rights. 7, slave laborers cut and polish diamonds. Number 8, conflict diamonds fund civil wars in Africa. Number 9, diamond wars are fought using child warriors or soldiers. And number 10, small arms trade is intimately related to diamond smuggling. Wow. And I know you buying your diamond, you have a sterilizing distance from all those atrocities because you walk into the store and you get your diamond grill, big diamond nugget in your ear, diamond studded this. But to me, every time I see an artist, a celebrity, or just a regular brother from around the way in the community or sister with a diamond, I think this is a person who lacks empathy or any real loyalty to the suffering and struggles of African people, of the diaspora and on the African continent. I don't think any self-respecting African would be caught dead. And I ain't saying you can't shine. There's fake diamonds, cubic zirconia, and diamond, fake diamond technology has advanced to the point where if it somehow feeds your spirit or your soul or makes you feel more alive to be covered in these trinkets, you can do so without. They even have some precious stones that are certified to be non-conflict and that the people are compensated if you're gonna go through all that goddamn effort to wear that silly glass. But I digress. Moving on. Del Jones also talks about sex slaves, literal sex slaves, not the figurative, oh, this guy just really wants sex and that's all he thinks about, but people who are in bondage to sex. And he juxtaposed the reality, the growing reality that, and awareness that there are people, child brothels and brothels all over the world where poor, starving families sell their pre-puberty age daughters into brothels. A good book on that is Disposable People. Somebody borrowed and never just returned my Disposable People text, and you really played me when you took that book because I was making some claims that book had evidence and supports for, and I couldn't find it when I needed to slap this fool in the head with my data. But I forgive you. Just give me back my book. But that book talks about life. The journalist who wrote that book goes into the child brothels in Bangladesh and other parts of Asia. He also talks about how Hindu and Buddhist religion actually give strong justification for selling children into slavery and child sex, and it's greatly tied to the Vedas and concepts of karma that a lot of so-called spiritual people walk around our community talking about karma and these concepts and don't understand just how insidious and wretched Eastern religions are, just as bad as they cousins Western religions, these male chauvinist murder cults. Hinduism and Buddhism are pro-slavery, pro-nationalism, and all that other toxic stuff, just like Islam and Christianity. But I digress. He talks about how the hip-hop pimps and hoe anthems, this concept of big pimp and spending G's, feeds into the acceptance of the sexual exploitation of women, the pimping women. Snoop Dogg alone did more to popularize the concept of pimping and even brought real world pimps, men who would traffic, coerce, and exploit women into sexual bondage and servitude, to the fore. And he toured all over the world with Don Magic Juan, and Don Magic Juan would be on his records literally giving game, teaching young men who were the primary consumers of hip-hop cultures how to not just look cool in a pimp aesthetic, but how to literally manipulate vulnerable women into engaging in acts of sex to pay off and to reward. What the fuck? Seriously. And now, he went on to have a Disney show and to coach football, and he became a Rasta. But to me, I never forget that. But people call me a hater. People talk about people can grow. I remember one time, every time I talk about the crimes, the recent, and this ain't going back 50, 60 years, this is going back 2 weeks. And people are like, well, people can grow. So you can make literally millions of dollars promoting pimpology. We don't love these hoes, really dehumanizing African womanhood and African women's sexuality, monetizing. You remind me of my Jeep. And then you grow some dreads or you buy some kids' football uniforms and all is forgiven. Not over here. But he talks about hip hop and pimp culture. And again, this is not innate in hip hop. This is not something that naturally arose from hip hop. This was something imposed on hip hop by corporate culture, by Western culture, by global white domination. Religious sex prisoners. I keep getting ahead of myself because he talks about how many religions. In fact, there is no major religion. The evangelical religion and the Boy Scouts just filed for bankruptcy due to the thousands of young boys who were molested by pedophiles within the Boy Scouts. But many people don't know that the Boy Scouts is essentially a chapter or a subsidiary of the Mormon Church. The evangelical church has as big of a child sex abuse cover-up scandal as the Catholic Church. Islam, all over these Quranic schools, madrasas, young boys are brought into and molested and used as sex slaves by high-ranking officials and just rank-and-file members of the Islamic community and the mosque communities and the mosque hierarchy. You read again Silent Terror by Samuel Cotton, and he talks about the slavery. So every major religion, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism. When I was living in New York City, there was which I think it's out of business, what's the name of it? Village Voice did an lead article called How the Rabbi Caught AIDS. And there was this rabbi who contracted AIDS and passed AIDS to his wife, and it was a ultra-orthodox Jews in Crown Heights. And it was found that many of these ultra-orthodox were engaging in trafficking of sex and engaging in sex with young girls and boys. And at the same time, they would have this pious persona of being highly religious and closed in communities. Sex scandals coming out of the Amish community. Religious delusion. You can't find a religious where Dr. Clark said that these religions are male chauvinist murder cults. They're also male chauvinist rape cults and sexual abuse cults. He goes into great detail about the Arab slave trade and the sex trade. Especially related to the oil oligarchs in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Dubai. A lot of our celebrities, just from mainstream celebrities like Will Smith to more obscure celebrities like E40, if you follow them on social media, they love nothing more than flexing in Dubai, because that is the planetary capital of excess and wealth. If you can throw on a turban and a Sikh's outfit, and you go, even Michael Jackson, that when he was trying to escape charges of child sex abuse, where did he go? To the Middle East. So he said that people, women, girls, boys are trafficked from Central Europe, Western Europe, mainly from conflict areas where there's a lot of conflict. Therefore, the infrastructure of education, policing, oversight, immigration and migration have broken down when there are economic instabilities, warfare, or ongoing civil unrest. That's where a lot of the sex traffickers target those populations. So when you go to these more established wealthy countries, from the U.S. to Saudi Arabia,
you
to
are far smarter than you can ever imagine.
Where's
There's no obstacle that you cannot overcome.
Japan,
No
where there are
problem you cannot solve,
wealthy people
and no goal that you cannot achieve
with capitalist
by
ideologies looking
your
as
mind.
people as commodities, as tools. You'll find that many of the people who are trafficked, the children and women and some men that are trafficked, always tend to come from these unstable regions, where they'll find from the Congo, Sierra Leone, a lot of Filipino, because of the poverty, and now they've got a fascist dictatorship in the Philippines. A lot of Hondurans since the coup d'etat. Whenever they go and break up these brothels and these sex trafficking rings, they're finding a lot of Honduran people. So these people literally travel the world. Many religious highly religious societies and leaders travel the world and look for vulnerable spaces. Haiti, after the earthquake and the earthquake and the hurricane ravaged Haiti, a lot of Haitian children started popping up in the global sex trade or chattel slavery all over the world. People who don't have passports, who don't have birth certificates, who can't be tracked, or who they target. So Dale Jones talks about this way back in 2004. He talks about that sex slaves are prevalent and are essential to the U.S. economy, to the capitalist global economy. The black market, the mainstream economy would collapse if not for black market drugs, black market organ trades, black market sex. A lot of these companies, hotel chains, major hotel chains are used. You'd have these sex traffickers will buy up entire floors. The royal family from these oil-rich countries will come here and buy entire hotel suites, entire floors, the first top 10 floors of the Hyatt Regency in New York. And the movie Taken, a lot of the stuff you see in the first Taken movie, a lot of that's real. Those auction blocks they had of young girls and places like that. So Dale says that religious segregation and the rape of children, boys, is prominent in the Hindu, Muslims, Catholic, Buddhist, fundamentalist church. Religious sects give women power. This is another caveat. Religious sects that give women power and status and authority have lower instances of abuse. So non-patriarchal religious and belief systems that allow for women to also hold authority alongside men have lower instances of abuse than the strictly patriarchal, strictly hierarchical structured religious groups. Economic exploitation is married to sexual exploitation. Capitalism is a rape system. So the more, as I said, the more economic instability there is, the more sex trafficking, sex exploitation, up into and including people who are like, well, I have 4 children, so I'll sell one of my children to the brothel so that all of my children don't die. Those things are going on to this day. And so Dale Jones talks about that in Culture Bandits. And again, as your culture starts to erode, and then once your culture starts to erode and your children become easy targets for this type of exploitation, it's hard to without that stability, without that nurturing. You have a lot of damaged people, a lot of people in need of services, inputs, a lot of people who are physically ravaged from sexual disease to their organs being, out of function. It's really horrible. I know this is hard to talk about, but it's necessary, and it is a fundamental component of capitalist exploitation. And as long as we are vulnerable to the systems and institutions of white domination, this is going to go on and continue to increase. One thing Dale Jones also talked about was he went into great detail about the Arab slave trade and the Arab sex trade that has been going on since literally the 6th century. Between the 6th century and the 24th century, this has been going on. And Dale Jones had a special place in his heart for this, because he understood that black people have been on the front lines against Zionist machinations in the Middle East. The African community and the African diaspora stood with Palestine, were against the war on terror. Statistically, black people were against U.S. imperial acts in the Middle East, and black people have, outside of people of Arab and Persian descent, black people around the world have embraced Islam and helped to spread Islam from its very founding. From even in Ethiopia, where the Prophet Muhammad sought refuge in Ethiopia when he was being persecuted by the Bedouin leaders, the tribal leaders of the Bedouins. So, there's so much history there. So Dale Jones said it's a special kind of betrayal. In one of our greatest, quote unquote, greatest leaders and longest standing leaders in Black America is Louis Farrakhan, who is a Muslim or Islamic leader. So Dale Jones takes special offense to the level of exploitation, sexual exploitation that goes on in the Islamic and Arab world that pretends to protect and care about these values. But let's go back to the text. Dale Jones said that the Arabs want our sympathy and help in their struggles against the New World Order war machine led by U.S. President George Bush and his lapdog Tony Blair. But until they, the Arabs, clean up their hunger for African slaves, they only can be seen as enemies of our race, tormentors of our people who must be dealt with the same way that you must deal with any savage white people. Oh, okay, I'm at an hour. So I'm going to wrap it up here. That's a very powerful note to end on. We're going to do part 2. Look for part 2. We're going to deal with sex prisoners and U.S. mind control. And we're going to talk a lot about Michael Jackson, who is one of the, basically the poster boy for U.S. mind control. We're going to talk about the destruction of reality and a lot more. In the second half of the book, where is the book? I don't even have the book to hold up, but I guess you'll put it up on the screen. So this is part 1 of Dale Jones' Sex Prisoners, Culture Bandits, Sex Prisoners, and meet part 2. After that, we're going to go talk about black on black violence with Amos Wilson, and I forgot what I said the next book after that will be, but I will make a commitment that there will not be any more of this. We'll be, at the very least, putting out a book review once a week. Can we stick to that at the very least? Once a week at least. We might have to double up on some because I feel like we're behind. But anyway, subscribe if you want more content. Check out African World Order if you want to support. Also, the shirt I'm wearing today is one of my homies from KC. The I'm KC store. This is Prospect. This is my hood where I grew up with, off 75th and Prospect, East Hill Village. Village boys. Shout out to Rip T. I owe you a phone call. My homeboy Rip the Crip. And shout out to The Popper. He just came out with a new album. He's an entrepreneur. He's helping to economically revitalize Kansas City, which is no small task. Black community, because it's one of the most racist, segregated places in the world. But all that be saying, go to imkc.com. Get the Prospect shirt, represent the East Hills Village, South KC, and go to my website afterwards, African World Order, where you can get the Bro Diallo Show official merch and some Pan-African, the aesthetics of liberation. That's everything. Like, subscribe. I don't know. I hate these outros. Patreon, yes. If you don't want to see me here, you see I go down these rabbit holes. So if you become a Patreon, you can help to support, help to sustain, help so that I get the proper nutrition that I need so that I don't go into these brain fogs, help to keep me laced in organic green tea, and secure the books, maintain and secure the equipment that we need so that we can expand our operations. Shout out to Delta Star Media. Shout out to co-conspirator number 2, my man Chauncey, my man Phil, for your technical and ongoing support. Oh, and Chauncey, I got the book you sent me, The Condemnation of Blackness. So I will be reviewing this. Brother Chauncey sent me this text. I can't wait to get into it. But I'm not going to get into it right now. Y'all have a good morning, evening, noon, or night, depending on when you're watching this. Shout out to Aromo, who edits all these videos, and Aromo Land Production. And that's it. You can start the outro music if you haven't started it already.